Good afternoon, Minister, our delegation, esteemed delegation from Zimbabwe, Acting CEO of Ezekiel Museums of South Africa, CEO of SARA, to all of our leaders, our members of the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, and to all of our guests here today. This is such an important occasion. In the last few weeks and months, we have been spending time in this room, attending to the work of decolonization, attending to the work of enabling our ancestors to go home to rest. We are dealing with the practical work of bringing an end to the vestiges of colonialism. And Ezekiel Museums is one of the leading museums in the world doing this work. But we come from a very deep colonial history of multiple colonialisms. As you know, we had a Dutch mercantile colonialism, we had a British colonialism, we had an internal colonialism inside of our country, but we also had South African expansionist expressions of power in the region, built upon these layers of colonialism that we are trying to overcome. As much as South Africa was a colonial victim, we have also exercised colonialism in the region. And today we are attending to that by returning these important, sacred belongings and Zimbabwean ancestors back to them. It gives me such pleasure to welcome all of you to this important occasion. Our first task then is to listen to the national anthem of South Africa and the national anthem of Zimbabwe.
To
now gives me great pleasure to call upon Mr. Khereshi Mokoena to make some short remarks on behalf. Please be seated, everyone, as Mr. Mokoena comes up to deliver his short remarks. Please be comfortable.
Program Director, thank you very much. I would like first to acknowledge the presence of the Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Honorable Gayton Mackenzie, the Ambassador of the Republic of Zimbabwe, the Director General of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, the Chairperson of Iziko Museum in absentia, and members of the staff, the acting CEO of Iziko, and the CEO of the South African Heritage Resources Agency, and all other institutions that are represented. I'm not going to be long. Standard practice is that when you have leaders in the house, we, the followers, don't speak too much. It is the safer route to go. The National Heritage Resources Act of 1999 was promulgated as a statement of principle that South Africa, with its complex past, its pain, its richness, its heritage, is worth celebrating. It is also that the heritage of South Africa is worth protecting, but also to serve to address past injustices. And through heritage, we can continue the work of healing and nation building. Today, the National Heritage Resources Act reaches beyond the borders of the Republic of South Africa. Through the provision of the Act, which caters for the restorative work of repatriation and return of the things that were taken out of our country and out of our region, we not only act as a domestic regulator of heritage, but also as an active and a responsible member of international heritage community. The National Heritage Resources Act provides for regulation of movement of heritage objects to ensure that those movable pieces of memory cannot simply be exported nor imported without proper authorization. Colonialism and its activities has resulted in a situation where communities and countries are stripped of their cultural assets, and they've been left poor as a result of the work of colonization. Standard practice is that we know colonization only politically. But the fact of the matter is that colonization was also cultural. Many countries today, they know of ancestors whose bodies were buried without other limbs, including the heads. So that is what colonization has done. I therefore want to acknowledge the work of various individuals and institutions and teams in ensuring that through this work, the work done by the damage caused by colonization is actually reversed. In this specific project where South Africa is returning on agreed terms the objects of cultural importance to the people of Zimbabwe and the ancestral remains, SARA has worked closely with the Iziko Museums of South Africa, Groote Schuur Museum, Zimbabwean authorities, and heritage practitioners to ensure this process was done with agency, care, and importance that it deserves. I therefore want to acknowledge the work of the various individuals and the teams involved. What we are doing here today is to not only hand over and return treasured cultural objects and ancestral remains, but we are reaffirming our shared commitment to dignity, memory, and redress of colonial injustices. The Zimbabwe bird, as it is known to be, the Zimbabwe bird and the pillar were removed during a colonial era that often disregarded the custodianship of local communities. And this return will affirm the dignity of the citizens of Zimbabwe. As such, we do not see this as just a transaction of material, but this is an act of recognition and restoration. South Africa and Zimbabwe share more than just a border, but also cultural, linguistic, and historical ties that have been almost severed through colonial influence. This return showcases that African nations recognize the importance of heritage justice, not merely as an act of compliance, but a means for healing. Today we acknowledge Zimbabwe's rightful custodianship of its heritage. Through this return, we are affirming that our legislation works, and we take serious our obligation to return of cultural heritage and ensure that heritage serve the path of justice. With this word, I would like to thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mokoena. Immediately, I call Mr. Ron Martin to present us a traditional leadership indigenous perspective.
Thank you, Program Director. And yes, thank you, everyone. I'm happy that the introductions took place before this, so it's not going to eat into my time. Honorable Minister, Excellencies from Zimbabwe, welcome once again. I've been tasked with giving the indigenous perspective, and normally this perspective would be given either by way of ceremony or ritual, but in this particular case, it's not entirely appropriate. So I will contextualize this historic day in a way how it relates to the indigenous interface and our perspective of how this process has unfolded over many, many decades that brought us to this particular day. And my focus will be mainly on the aspect of human remains, because it's been a stickler. It's been one of those discussion points and points of contention between engagement, between a resurgence movement from an indigenous perspective and government departments, government institutions, and agencies such as IZICO and other agencies of sports, arts, and culture. And context is like this. The collection and study of human remains, particularly African remains, is still the most contentious practice in science worldwide. And why particularly African? Because African remains are the most studied. It's the most, if I can use the word, trafficked. It's the most distributed around the world, still, even today. And yes, there are debates taking place at institutional, academic levels, but these debates around the ethics of those practices often exclude the indigenous voice, the African voice, the very subject that gets debated about. So how do you determine that level of ethics? It's a discussion that still needs to take place, and it's a discussion that still continues to take place. This institution, at least, is listening. As indigenous activists and leadership, we've been engaging with IZICO since 1997 after the first international Indigenous Peoples Conference that was held here. Iziko was one of, well, the Old South African Museum was one of the co-hosts. And since then, the discussion has yielded at least a positive partnership and engagement between Indigenous leadership and this organization. The discussion continues till today. Our activism has had to evolve to include terminology that relate to the science of it. And now, you have to understand this. Scientific terminology was always used to exclude discussion with Indigenous people. But we quickly had to learn terms like AMS, radiocarbon dating and isotope stabilization, things like that. The human body parts like metatarsal, metacarpal, these are things that are being exported for study to other countries. And if these terminologies are used and we don't understand them, then we don't know what's happening. We don't know that that's our ancestor or a piece of our ancestor that's been sent overseas for study. So we had to learn these things so that we could speak the sciencey language. And I think Iziko has actually assisted the movement in that sense, because you allowed us in and you allowed us to do our apprenticeship under all of these sciencey people so that we could understand these things and actually engage more positively and more proactively and more fruitfully in these discussions. That is one thing that I have to give this institution credit for. So, as a descendant of the indigenous Khoikhoi people of the subcontinent, as well as a heritage scholar, I, as well as my chief, Zenzele Khoisan over there, who I acknowledge, participates, or still participating in these engagements. But why am I saying all of this? Like I said earlier, we cannot do ritual in our send-off to these remains, the remains that you see on my left, as well as the cultural object that's so proudly displayed on my right. But it is not my place as a South African to do a ceremony when the sin of collection was probably committed by one of my countrymen. We have all, directly or indirectly, been affected by the sins of those who went before, the ones who plundered, the ones who did grave robbing, the ones who removed artifacts and objects without consultation with their indigenous custodians. So, I mean, those guys named Jones, Rhodes, whatever, I mean, sorry, I don't know if those are the guys that we're actually talking about, but yes, these are the contexts that we move within. And these are the rights that we are rectifying, even though we are not the perpetrators. So while I cannot provide ceremony in my perspective, I hope that I have provided some context within which this occasion is taking place. And I'm glad that it's with our closest country, neighbor, Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was a country that gave a home to people exiled from this country during the liberation struggle. My chief, Zenzele Khoisan, was one of those. As a very young man, he traveled through places in Zimbabwe, Fig Tree, Plum Tree, Bulawayo, Wankie, Falstaff, Makwa, before arriving at the Zambezi River and crossing over into Zambia on his journey. And it's through the hospitality of these countries that nurtured him and kept him alive during those turbulent times that he is actually back and can lead our resurgence movement as well as our partnership with this institution to assist us all in rectifying this horrible past. So I thank you personally for that, Excellencies. Agencies of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, SARA, Iziko, etc. As Indigenous people, we want to thank you. And this gladdens my heart because 3 decades of activism and partnership with you have given birth to this particular day. And thank you for allowing us to be a part of it.
Ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, we now come to a very important part of today's ceremony. I want to call up Dr. Bongani Ndlovu, Acting CEO of Iziko Museums of South Africa, and Dr. Paul Mupira of the National Museums and Monuments of Zimbabwe, to come forward, present their remarks on what they are going to do together as they sign documents of transfer that are an important administrative, diplomatic aspect of what we are doing today.
Thank you, Program Director, Minister, Ambassador, members of the Diplomatic Corps, colleagues, brothers and sisters, all protocol observed. Last year, on the 13th of March 2025, Minister Mackenzie officially launched a series of activities here at Iziko South African Museum, marking the bicentenary of Iziko South African Museum. And embedded in his address was a challenge for museum to reflect and also to identify items, particularly those that reflect to the Khoi descent and indigenous communities that needed to be returned to those communities. And as part of a series of engagements, and as part of the bicentenary program, Iziko deeply reflected on the heritage of South African Museum and the legacy of this oldest museum in South Africa. We acknowledge the role that the South African Museum played in heritage research, preservation, and promotion. But at the same time, we confronted a difficult truth. A difficult truth that the minister also raised when he first called a number of Khoi and San leaders here in Cape Town, where they discussed difficult issues and difficult confrontations around San, Khoi, and indigenous communities' legacies. We looked at how the South African Museum, alongside other museums, as we reflected last year, played an important role and a key role in the act of unethical collecting, in the act of grave robbing, in the act of looting, in the act of dehumanizing indigenous communities, in the act of making the other inferior. But we also acknowledge the fact that the museum and other institutions was not alone in this. The museum was working with academics, missionaries, military officials, embassies, and other actors in this process of collecting, looting, and making what was called the other inferior. Today, on behalf of Iziko Museums of South Africa, and by default, the Iziko South African Museum, together with the National Museums and Monuments of Zimbabwe, and under the guidance of our respective governments, we take a meaningful step forward, a meaningful step that attempts to address this painful legacy. From a traumatic past, we are building new relationships. From a difficult colonial history, we are forging a new future, a future grounded in Ubuntu, a future grounded in museum practices that uphold human dignity and human rights. It is in this spirit that we respectfully hand over what has been generally referred to as the soapstone buried, the pillar, 8 ancestral human remains, to our counterpart in Zimbabwe. We do acknowledge the role, a very active role that has been played by the ministry, by the department, by SARA, by also the Department of Public Works. Under their guidance, we've been able and we've been guided to reach this milestone. We express our sincere appreciation to our principals for their leadership in guiding this important rehumanization process. We look forward to working, as indicated earlier, with our colleagues in Zimbabwe, working and seeing that we collaborate and that This difficult past usher in a period wherein we build on mutual collaboration, on mutual respect, and we also rely on each other trust. With those a few words, to our colleagues in Zimbabwe, we are ready to officially hand over the items that have been identified for us as Izigo to hand over.
Honorable Minister, dear delegates, we are happy to be here to receive the sacred objects that Izico is handing over to us. This journey started 137 years ago when the first bird was collected from the sacred enclosure of the hill complex of Great Zimbabwe. At the time of collection, this was said to be the best in the collection. So we lost the best. And that was in 1889. In 1891, 4 more followed from the same sacred enclosure. The person who had collected the first bird had hoped to go back and collect the other 4. But then somebody else came and collected the other 4 before him. And that was Theodore Bent. He also brought the 4 birds to the South African Museum. The first one was handed over to Rhodes. The other 2 birds remained in Zimbabwe, but those are the only ones that remained in Zimbabwe. The other one found its way in Germany. The repatriation process with South Africa started immediately after independence in 1981, when we received the 4 birds from the South African Museum. So we have always been collaborating in terms of the return of cultural property, and that is very significant. Of course, we lost a collection of 30,000 insects because it was an exchange. So we are looking at our colleagues to relook at that collection because it was also the best of the best collection of those insects in Africa, as per scholars. The human remains are also significant. They have a more complex history because we don't know the exact locations where they came from. And so we still have a bit of work to be able to reunite the remains with the communities from where they were extricated. And as the previous speakers have already said, these were collected as curiosities and subjects of study. And I think this is now a discredited notion all over the world that the ancestors should lie where they, in the first place, requested to be buried when they died, with proper cultural rites. And our collection of these remains will ensure that we reunite them with their communities as far as we are able to trace the history of the different individuals. The bird is the proverbial saying, those who come first will become last. So we are collecting the bird that came first, last. We are still happy about that. And I am happy that our South African colleagues are keen to continue dialogue so that there are possibilities of collaborating in the return of any other items that we may have not been able to identify during this short period that we have engaged in trying to get the last Zimbabwe bird home. And I think that the focus was too much on the bird and not on the other cultural property that we may be able to exchange. So we are very happy and excited about this ceremony, and we are ready to receive the collection to transport it back home. I thank you.
You know, we've learned when we have been working, doing this work of repatriation and restitution, we have learned that when the bird goes back to Zimbabwe, it will no longer be an object. It becomes a belonging once again. And when the dead return to Zimbabwe, they will not be human remains any longer. They will become ancestors once again. Now is the time to listen to the Reverend Paul Bayete Damasane, who is the Deputy Chief Secretary of the President of Zimbabwe, to talk on behalf of the Republic of Zimbabwe.
The Honorable Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture of the Republic of South Africa, Honorable Gayton Mackenzie, the Special Envoy of our President, His Excellency Emmerson Damodza Mnangagwa, Mr. Innocent Garissa Moyo, the Ambassador of Zimbabwe to the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Lovemore Mazemo, the Chairman of the Izigo Museum Board and other members present, the representatives of SARA and other cultural institutions here present, senior government officials here present, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. I am honored to address you this afternoon, close to 7 months since the first engagements we made on the bird on the 8th of October 2025 at the Groote Museum. Today, on behalf of the government of Zimbabwe, on this historic occasion, we witness the handover of the Zimbabwe bird, its pillar and accessories, the ancestral human remains from the government of the people of the Republic of South Africa back to Zimbabwe. It has been a journey of note for me as a citizen of Zimbabwe, but I believe it is a day of joy for the Zimbabwe bird, which has migrated in unfortunate circumstances to make a sojourn in the spiritual confines of Grooteskill for 130 or so years. Again, within the confines of Grooteskill, we are reminded that is where the sons of King Lobengula, Njube, and Rhodes were taken from Zimbabwe, then by Cecil John Rhodes, to be far from the people of Zimbabwe, lest they follow up on the throne of Lobengula. And they were brought up in Grooteskill, and Rhodes finally died and is buried today at Makhanda in the cemetery next to the Anglican Church in Makhanda. If the bird were to speak, it would articulate the journey better than I am. I do acknowledge that, Honorable Minister and dear colleagues, speaking to a people who are prevented from seeing their own guilt and facing up to some uncomfortable truths by their own uncomfortable, or rather by their own comfortable position, privileged, can be very frustrating. But I am gratified with the positive and supportive role of Izigo, Sarah, and the DSAC staff that we were engaging with. The process made engagement very amicable. It was tough, but it was very friendly, because we knew we were talking to people that were thinking like we were thinking. Today, the deep symbolism and significance of this occasion lies in the truth of our shared being as Zimbabwe and South Africa. It also lies in the commitment both Zimbabwe and South Africa have made with regards to international, multilateral, and continental conventions. I speak of the UNESCO and the AU, African Union Agenda 2063, as it pertains to culture. It also speaks to our painful history of colonial violence and prejudice, indelibly printed in the scars that we have. The beauty of this event is in the shared commitment that Their Excellencies President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa and Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa have resolved to correcting historical injustices through mutual diplomatic and technical cooperation at various levels, from technical, diplomatic, and political. Our two presidents are united in the truth that our future is in our hands, and it is none but ourselves that can change or shape our destiny. We say back home, ilizwe lakhiwa ngabanini balo. We celebrate the return of these artifacts while the din of the celebration of General Chris Hani is still sounding in our ears. Chris Hani passed through Zimbabwe, very close to my maternal grandmother's home in Victoria Falls, 2 kilometers from our homestead in the gorge of the Great Zambezi. And they fought the Great Wange battle alongside Joe Modise, the late Colonel Dube, Chinga Dube, the currently living Mr. Hadebe, who is a recipient of the Grand Star of Zimbabwe and is over 90 as we speak. We rejoice in that these ceremonies happen almost close to each other. And it's no accident, but divine destination. Ladies and gentlemen, the artifacts and ancestral remains we received today were removed from Zimbabwe during a period marked by colonial expansion, exploitative scientific action in the name of academics, and the systematic dislocation of African heritage aimed at dismembering us as a people. To us, they are not artifacts, but parts of our shared identity that our two presidents have deliberately and intentionally decided to remember, so posterity may cherish the multi-pronged purpose of our liberation struggles as an African people. The Zimbabwe bird, as an enduring national symbol, embodies the spiritual, political, and cultural identity of our people, with its origins at the Great Zimbabwe, an ancient center of civilization, thought, and spiritual connection. Our nation is the only nation in Africa, if not the world, that is named after its prime national heritage site. Similarly, the pillar and the ancestral remains represent not merely archaeological or anthropological specimens, but the lived histories and sacred identities of our ancestors. These remains, as we have established through our technical engagements, belong to individuals from various parts of Zimbabwe, including Chata District, now called Chivu, Koromonzi, Mazowe, the home of our spiritual icon Mbuya Nehanda, Kwekwe, the residence currently of our president's farm, and Mberengwa, among others. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, we should not forget that we were subjected to extensive colonial era study and extraction practices, often without our consent, at most times with cultural insensitivity or adequate and respectful documentation. The artifacts' removal disrupted not only their physical resting places, but also the spiritual continuum that binds communities to the ancestors. We need the historians. We need the historians in our countries to tell us both sides of the story, of both our dismembering within the current process of our remembering. We cannot and should not tell one side of the story, as in the words of the Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie at the inauguration of Berlin's Humboldt Forum in February 2022 said, because to tell only one part of the story is essentially to lie. Honorable Minister and colleagues, we commend the government of the Republic of South Africa through you, sir, and particularly the Izigo Museums, Grootesque, and associate institutions for their cooperation, transparency, and goodwill throughout this process. The deaccessioning and transfer of these remains and artifacts to Zimbabwe is a significant and commendable step. It demonstrates a shared commitment to ethical museum practices, restorative justice, and a respect for African heritage. As the people of Zimbabwe, we further acknowledge the collaborative efforts of the technical teams from both countries, whose work in documentation, verification, and coordination has made today possible. Their efforts have also highlighted important gaps in provenance, which we jointly commit to addressing through further research and institutional cooperation. We thank you. Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, this handover ceremony is not an end in itself. Rather, it marks the beginning of an important journey of rehumanization and reintegration of cultural heritage in the broadest and most inclusive sense. The government of Zimbabwe is committed to ensuring that these ancestral remains are accorded the utmost dignity through culturally appropriate committal processes. It should please you, Honorable Minister, sir, and colleagues, that further research will be undertaken to establish further provenance details that will guide appropriate traditional rites and ceremonies in consultation with affected communities. In this regard, we view this process as a model framework for future repatriations anchored in dignity, scientific rigor, and cultural integrity. This occasion also celebrates the enduring and cordial diplomatic relations between the people of Zimbabwe and the people of South Africa. Our two nations, bound not only by geography, but by a shared history of struggle, solidarity, and mutual support in the quest for liberation and self-determination, will continue. Today's event strengthens those ties further, demonstrating how cultural diplomacy can play a meaningful role in healing historical wounds and fostering unity across borders. It will please you to note, Honorable Minister, say, that the two countries need to up their relationship within the arts, culture, and heritage sphere. A continued engagement in this area is important to increase our knowledge as one people bonded by a common history of heritage and struggle. We therefore look forward to deepening collaboration between our institutions in areas such as heritage management, research, conservation, and education for the benefit of both our peoples and future generations. In closing, let me reiterate that we as Africans honor those that saw the sun before us and commit to upholding and not destroying that which they bequeathed to us. And therefore we commit ourselves to a future guided by increased bilateral cooperation in areas of culture and heritage, spurred on by this historic occasion. On behalf of the government and the people of Zimbabwe, I extend once again our sincere, heartfelt gratitude to the government and the people of South Africa for this brotherly and fraternal gesture. May this moment mark the beginning of greater things for our respective countries and peoples inspired by the true spirit of Ubuntu. With those words, ndolebuwa ngamanda, rialebuha thoda, ikensile, bayadanki, siyabonga.
Thank you so much, Reverend, for drawing our attention to these deep historic ties that we have. And you reminded me of a visit just 3 weeks ago to our university by the still living Comrade James April, who fought at Hwange alongside Chris Hani. And also to remember the late Comrade Basil February, who fell in that battle. And some of that work of collaborating is already underway. I'm very pleased to say that in our midst today, on a very short visit to South Africa, we have Dr. Njabulo Chipangura, one of the main heritage professionals and scholars of Zimbabwe, who got part of his education at the University of the Western Cape. Now, it is my great pleasure to call upon our Director General of Sport, Arts and Culture to make a few remarks and to introduce our Honourable Minister.
Program Director, Honorable Minister, Mr. Karise, hope I'm saying it correctly, the leader of the envoy, and the entire delegation from Zimbabwe. Acting Chairperson, I'm elevating your status, Benedict, of Iziko Museum, and the board of SARA. My colleagues that are here, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot, Minister, say it any better than what Prof said at the beginning of this session, when he said, today we witness the practical reversal of effects of colonization injustices. Minister Mackenzie is going to address us, and a lot has been said here. I am not going to make a speech. I am here to introduce the minister. But before I do so, I just want you to understand who he is. And it links up with what I'm going to say as I introduce him. And in doing that, I'm going to read a message that was forwarded to me by the Deputy Director General, Mr. Ndima, sitting over there on the 28th of February, less than 2 months ago from today. It reads as follows. Good morning, DDG. Please call the envoy of President Mnangagwa. Please meet with them today together with your team. They have been sent here particularly for this matter, which they consider very urgent. I got a call from His Excellency Ramaphosa to make sure my team meets with the team of his counterpart today. Please call them and understand their wishes, but assure them of our highest priority to return the soapstone, bed, and other items. Thank you, DDG. They are waiting for your call. This message came from Minister Mackenzie on the 28th of February, 2026. The DDG responds to say, thank you, Minister. I have spoken to Mr. Harise. We are coordinating the meeting for today, and the marathon started. We are sitting here less than 2 months from the time that this message was sent, and we are witnessing, as Professor Rasool says, a practical reversal of the colonial injustices. I am here to introduce to you a man who's now about 22 months into this job. He has taken to it like a duck to water. He has come in with a bang, unapologetic, full of purpose, with a clear vision to see sport, arts and culture and heritage thrive, shine and grow in South Africa. He has been, I must say, a breath of fresh air. I've been working for government, in government and outside of government for quite a number of years. We won't mention them, how many years it's been. And believe me, he has been a breath of fresh air in a very bureaucratic environment that we work within, especially in government. And this environment can be very stifling. Minister Mackenzie was very quick to understand the mandate of his department, including the responsibility of the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture in implementing programs to restore pride and dignity of the people. As a result, he outlines the vision, challenges his team. You just heard the message sent on the 28th of February, and now we're here. He challenges his team to think outside the box, as people say, and sets very tight timelines and timeframes, and follows up on commitments that have been made. He's here today because he prioritizes everything. We are here today because he believed it can be done, leader of the Special Envoy. He believed in the meaning and importance of these sacred symbols of cultural heritage for the people of Zimbabwe. If you read the message later, I'll show you, it talks about the fact that he wants this thing to be done before the 18th of April, which is Zimbabwe's Independence Day or the National Freedom Day. We're sitting here on the 14th of April. The man sitting right next to you got this message on the 28th of February, and it happened. He is, by virtue of where he comes from, an established businessman, an entrepreneur who, before joining government, ventured into different industries, achieving success in those spaces. The position that he now holds is not his first executive authority position. He has worked as a mayor in this very province that we are in, and is now serving in another executive authority position as the Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture. Honorable Mr. Mackenzie, sir, please come and address us.
Please be seated, please be seated. Kindly be seated. I was hoping the DG can read more of those messages from the DDG and I hear what they talk about. The Director General, the CEO, Fiziko, Reverend Damasani, the Ambassador of Zimbabwe, hello and welcome. I think it's a week where you have presented your credentials to the President. So when we came here, he was leading us to the 5th floor. And I said, it's a very risky maneuver for a man that just arrived in South Africa to lead us in a building owned by us. You are most welcome. To all the dignitaries, Mr. Ron Martin, everybody that's here, everybody's important. I say that a week or so ago I was in trouble because somebody said to me, Minister, don't forget to thank the pastors that are here. So, Reverend, I thank the pastors, Mr. Garissa. When I was done, during lunch, the bishops came to me. What have we done wrong to you for you not to greet us? That was during starters. During the main course, the evangelist came to me. What have we done wrong to you for you not to recognize us? During dessert, Professor, the apostles came to me. Said, we hope one day you'll tell us what we did wrong. So I don't want to make that mistake again. Hence, I want to greet the bishops, the apostles, the evangelists, and even the brothers that are still going to be appointed. We are greeting you. Even you that once become a pastor, you are also greeted. So we've greeted everyone. I'm sitting here listening to what was said here, the history of this sacred bird. Maybe some amongst us do not understand when it was mentioned that there was a trade-off with insects. There was insects that Zimbabwe had, that the apartheid regime wanted. And they said, send us those ones that you have, because it was a special type of different insects there. And we'll return 4. To show you those who were very important, very much needed, much sought after insects they had. But because this took precedence above all else, the Zimbabweans reluctantly agreed to that. Now, I've heard today the Zimbabweans want them back. If there's mosquitoes amongst those, may it return very speedily. On a serious note, we are standing here today, and there's many important messages, Reverend, that we are sending out. But before we start, we must thank the Ezekiel Museum. We must thank the people at DSEC under the leadership of the DG, Stella Kumalo, and the DDG, Mr. Ndima, and the whole team, Mr. Langeveld, everybody that worked. You know, I'm going to Zimbabwe tomorrow. A lot of people are already praising me because they're watching on the internet what's happening. But I cannot stand here and take the credit for what's happening here. Because this started from the top. The president never calls you more than once. He called me 3 times that day. Now you can understand if you get a call from your boss 3 times, you must have called 3 times. I'm like, yo, he really wants to reshuffle me today. But on a serious note, the president was clear. I'm standing here because of President Ramaphosa. He said to me, this must happen. So I cannot come here and take all the credit while I was just following instruction between 2 of our excellencies, President Mnangagwa and President Ramaphosa. Now, esteemed guests, what you're experiencing here and you are part of history. Because if you look at South Africa, since I've been appointed, our relationship with Zimbabwe, you had John Bukelo Nyati, the president of the PAC, that was hosting and housed in Zimbabwe. When it was very difficult, he died in Zimbabwe. You had the first commander of MK, Basil February. He lives, I think, Somerset West, not far from here. When it was difficult for him here, Zimbabwe opened the doors to them. So the relationship between Zimbabwe and South Africa is steeped in blood and promise and covenant. Now, here's the uncomfortable, the elephant in the room I want to address. Many Zimbabweans will say, when some of us say you must go home, they will call us, Reverend, that we are xenophobic. And I want to address that here today. When the envoy came, I dropped everything and I said, let's go for dinner. I've been nothing but collegial. But here's the uncomfortable truth. When you run away from your country, you must come with a reason to us, why are you running away? Then you start saying things like they want to kill us. They kill people in Zimbabwe. And that is what's happening here. We hear the worst of Zimbabwe as a country by some of the people that must justify why they are here without papers. Zimbabwe does not have a murderous regime. There's no war in Zimbabwe. This act shall show the ones that is willing to stare the truth in the eye, that we are not xenophobic. We love Zimbabweans. But loving Zimbabweans, we also learn from Zimbabwe. I got a complaint from a coach here by us, a reverend. He wrote a very big letter to my office that he has not been allowed, or his agent wrote a letter that Zimbabwe does not allow him to coach to be a deputy coach in one of the leagues there. And he wanted me to act, because Zimbabwe say what he does is not a special skill. And I agree with Zimbabwe. That wasn't a special skill. Zimbabweans must take preference in Zimbabwe. And that's why I've never made a noise about that. And South Africans should get the jobs, and where there's a special skill required, it should go to a person that has that special skill, no matter which country he's from. So I had to mention that today, because I serve a living God, and God has a way of just making things possible. I was called the biggest xenophobe, but today it is me that has been put at the head of returning the property of Zimbabwe. What we see here today, Reverend and Special Envoy Carissa, it's, as I mentioned, it's history. It is history because it's not only the sacred bird, but we also have leaders, chiefs that are going home. People that had names, people that led people. They were taken here without the permission of their families. They were brought to South Africa. It was clear theft. And today, we are returning them for them to go and rest. We cannot stand here. I went to Scotland, Mr. Garissa. When I went to Scotland to go and get the remains of South Africans, and we were at the Hunterian Museum, and we said this remains was taken, and they graciously agreed to return them. And the president said that it's not enough that they must return them, they must pay us for having stolen our artifacts and our leaders. So we cannot behave like a colonial power. We must, and it's going to happen. Today I was taken to a tour where we keep stolen items. I'll call it stolen items. The cupboards are full of remains of people from different countries in Africa. And I commit myself today, publicly so, that I will be seized with little else than the return of everything that I've seen today. And within 90 days, DG, those cupboards need to be empty. We are starting today. We are the government of national unity. We are the hope of the people. We are ethical government. The koi and the sun has been an object of absolute curiosity by racist scientists. And the koi in the sun is spread all over the world. You go to Europe, the lines in the museums are full because people are coming to look at our art, our remains, our artifacts. So I'm saying that I cannot start that work to go and get the koi in the sun leaders back home, to go and look for King Hintsa, to go and look for Koning Waterboer. If I lead an organization or a department that is guilty of the very same things. So to Zimbabwe, I want to say thank you. Thank you for the manner, Mr. Gariza, and way you've handled us. Very dignified, very collegial, very respectful. I want to thank you. To our people of Iziko Museum, today you'll be getting the first letter where we want a whole list of every remain that does not belong to us. Because we cannot behave like our oppressors. We cannot behave like a colonial power. We have enough art, we have enough history, we have enough artifacts to fill our museums with the truth and with dignity. So today, the bird is going home. I was joking earlier with the Reverend and Ambassador, because there's still a debate among the very smart people. The people that got, when they talk about their CVs, you will hear LLP, PhD, they will remix the whole alphabet. Serious people. They are still, Reverend, I was at a function. There was 2 Mackenzies. So I would tell the story to my staff. There was 2 Mackenzies, so they messed up the papers. When they introduced me, they mixed me with this educated Mackenzie, highly educated. And they said, the next speaker, which was me, he's got an MBA, he's got a PhD. I'm sitting there like, what am I going to do today? And as I walk up, people were clapping. Hey, we're going to listen to this educated man. And I stood up stage, Reverend, I said, Ambassador, I said, well, I also have an MBA. My MBA stands for married but available. I said, I also have a PhD. My PhD stands for passed high school with difficulty. And that's how I managed to break the ice. But I was told that there's a big debate out with the real name of the bird. Some say it's an eagle, fish eagle, and I'm not talking about the alcohol brand in South Africa, don't confuse the two. Some say it's a soapstone bird, it's a pingu. So I said, no, I'm going to Zim tomorrow morning. The scientists and the professors must get together, because if they are unable to name the bird, I shall take it upon myself and rename this bird so my name can live in history. I want to say it's important to send the bird home today. But we are also sending home 8 sets of human remains. I want to spend a moment on this, because these individuals deserve more than a line in a speech. These remains were collected from Zimbabwe, then Southern Rhodesia, during the late 19th and 20th century. They were acquired by colonial officials, medical practitioners, and researchers, and donated to what became Ezekiel as scientific specimens. They were assigned accession numbers, catalogued and stored. But let me tell you who some of them actually are. One of them is believed to have been a Makalanga chief. His skull and jaw were collected in 1910 by a man named Arthur Edwards and donated to this institution. He was somebody's leader, and he's a lot of people's ancestor. He's been sitting in the museum drawer for 116 years. Two of them, accession numbers 1866 and 1867, are Shona individuals whose remains were taken from graves in the Salisbury and Goromonzi areas by a Dr. J.G.M. Mele. They were removed from graves, not found, not donated, but taken from the very ground where their families have laid them to rest. One of them, accession 1884, is described in the colonial record as a Mashona male who was murdered over accusation of witchcraft near the Zambezi River. His skull was collected and sent here. Somebody recorded his cause of death as a curiosity. Nobody cared to record his name. Two more. Ascension 1883A and 1883B were found together at the bottom of an ancient mining shaft in Mazoe district in 1917. Buried together at the bottom of a shaft. They were disturbed 700 years or more after their death and sent to Cape Town. These are not abstractions or numbers. These are people. They are Shona people, Makalanga people, Zimbabwean people, removed from their graves, their communities, and their homeland under the logic that their bodies were data. They were treated merely as specimens for a misguided colonial physio science that never asked their families for permission and never intended to give them back. South Africa's national policy on the repatriation and restitution of human remains and heritage objects, adopted by Cabinet in 2021, provides the framework for correcting this. It is grounded in the principle that ancestral remains are not scientific property. They belong to their communities, their descendants, and the land from which they came. Returning them, Mr. Garissa, is not a gesture of generosity. It's an obligation, and it is long overdue. Zimbabwe did this for us. In September 2024, the government of Zimbabwe facilitated the return of liberation heroes who died in exile on Zimbabwean soil, along with others from Zambia. Duma Nokwe, Me Flores Muposo, Basil February. They were returned with ceremony, dignity, and a care. President, His Excellency Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, acknowledged that death at Freedom Park. Today, South Africa reciprocates, not only for the fighters of the liberation era, but for people taken from graves all over Africa, generations before any of us were born. I want to say something about the broader significance of today, because I think we owe it to this occasion to be clear about what we're actually doing, and we hope it signals beyond these walls. South Africa has held and continues to hold objects and remains it should not. The debate about repatriation has far long been conducted on terms set by the institution that holds the objects. Those institutions speak about universal access, about the capacity to preserve. What they speak about less is the fundamental moral fact. The objects were not collected, they were taken. The bodies were not donated, they were removed. And the question is not whether returning them creates a difficult precedent. The question is whether keeping them perpetuates an injustice. The answer is always a resounding yes. South Africa is not a perfect actor in the story. We held this sacred bird for 137 years. We cited the 1910 Act when Zimbabwe asked for the return of the bird. We cited the 1910 Act. We were slow, but today we are acting, not because we are legally compelled to also, but because it is the right thing to do. And in doing the right thing, we are choosing to say something to every institution and every government still holding what should not be retained. The era of colonial collection is over. The time for return has come. And African governments can and should lead that process, government to government, without waiting for colonial powers to locate their conscience. The world shall see what happens in Harare tomorrow when we place this priceless carving in the hands of President Mnangagwa. They shall see African solidarity in action. Before I conclude, I want to say to Iziko Museum, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for acting within my time frames. I want to commend each and every one at the Iziko Museum. Distinguished guests, tomorrow, this centuries-old carving goes home. Our chiefs are going home. It will not be the Zimbabwean soapstone bird anymore, nor an object in the library at Groote Schuur. There will be no accession numbers, dimension in this or such. It will be the sacred bird. It will be our leaders. The sacred bird, nothing tells you how sacred this bird is than this bird finding its way home. It will be Chapungu, it will be Hungwe, depending on who you ask. Even Mackenzie's name is still coming. I said, Buster, you better name it because I'll call it a chicken if I have to. I want to say to President Ramaphosa, thank you. Thank you. I knew nothing about the soapstone birds. Thank you for teaching me that history, but not only teaching me the history, trusting me to take it back before Zimbabwean Independence Day. Because the president has made a promise to his counterpart, His Excellency Mnangagwa, President Mnangagwa, President Emerson Mnangagwa. And he said to him, I promise you, it will be back before the 18th. And he has trusted me. So you can understand, when I sent that message, Mr. Diba, when I said you'll meet them today, what I didn't tell you in the message, I've already spoken to Mr. Innocent. I said, let's go for dinner tonight, 7 p.m. So at dinner, my first question was, did Mr. Ndima meet with you? He said, yes, we met. If you didn't meet with him, it would have been World War III in the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. But thank you, Mr. Ndima. In conclusion, it's very emotional. It's very, very emotional because I got a letter from a country I'm not going to name. And he said, I hear the bird, there's plans to return the bird to Zimbabwe. I sent one letter back to say, in my language, Reverend, which you attempted here, which I appreciated. I said, who kom jay in this saka? It means, how do you involve yourself because it's brother to brother? You are distant friends. It's time that Africans do right by Africans. We must do right by each other. This thing does not have any Europe involvement or West involvement, even Chinese involvement, Asian involvement. It is African to African. And I promise you, Reverend, if there's any Zimbabwean remain here, it shall leave our shores. We will not keep it here. It must go home. The sacred bird is going home. Everybody, one day you can say you were part. I was there when the bird went home. It is a very big thing for Zimbabwean, South African, Africa to Africa, and a message outside the relations. We're sending a very strong message to Zimbabwe that we are your brothers. We are from the same continent. We want to apologize that it took 137 years. Presidents like President Ramaphosa don't come around every term. But he made this possible. And I'm asking may the 8 individuals who travel with the bird, may they find rest and peace in the soil where they're from, because they are the sons of the Zimbabwean soil. South Africa chose justice today. Siyabonga, tatenda, kyalebua, baie dankie. May God bless all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. That was extremely powerful. We appreciate your remarks. Let me please call up Bernadette Muthian, Council Member of Iziko Museums of South Africa, to give a vote of thanks, after which refreshments will be served. and the minister and other relevant members will have an engagement with the media.
Thank you, Professor Siraj Rasool. I'm slightly shorter. Those remarks that I'm making will not exceed 2.5 minutes, and I swear on my country's constitution. Moho, hello. IZICO is a public institution, as we know. The foundation of our democracy, and IZICO's work is our Constitution of 1999, with its 7 non-derogable or non-negotiable rights, which include human dignity, freedom, and equality. The realization of human dignity is not negotiable. The Zimbabwe bird or eagle is unique to Great Zimbabwe of the 11th century, occupied for centuries, the largest stone construction in sub-Saharan Africa. The San lived there 100,000 years ago, and others joined them over 2,000 years ago. There are speculated connections with South Africa's Mapungubwe, showing colonial borders as imposed on ancient kinship and migration. The sacred totem, a messenger from God and the ancestors, was subjected to colonial, anthropological, racist looting, with Cecil Rhodes at the forefront, devoid of any conscience. This ancient, magnificent bird symbolizes post-colonial freedom of Zimbabwe, tied to us, its southern neighbor, its cousin, and signifies the importance of our country's commitments to Pan-Africanism, the African Union, and our SADC region. It also speaks to the UN Charter on Enslavement and the UN Draft Treaty on Crimes Against Humanity, with repatriation or rematriation of ancestral remains and so-called artifacts at its core. Recently in Kinderle, in the deep Northern Cape, where we buried 63 coffins of ancestral remains, President Ramaphosa declared current government policy: return and rebury, reiterated by our Honorable Minister. Human dignity, including of the deceased and of our culture, is not negotiable. And so too we promise Zimbabwe are those sacred insects or valuable insects of yours, especially the mosquitoes. Our Minister Mackenzie, at the same Kinderle funeral, graciously acknowledged that his work is built on the labors of his predecessors. We thank him for that graciousness, but he is the first minister to catapult the issue of the return and rematriation or repatriation of ancestral remains and so-called artifacts in such a quick and efficient and beautiful and dignified way. For that, we thank him especially. And the veterans who've been working on ancestral remains for decades, like Prof. Rasool, will especially acknowledge this, that is in this administration, that this has been accelerated, much to our delight, as we can then sleep at night. So we thank our minister and his department. We thank Sarah and other partners for their tireless collaborations with us and others on restoring human dignity and cultural dignity to our country and our continent, to the government and people of Zimbabwe, our neighbors, our friends. Thank you for walking this painful and healing journey with us. To IZICO Council and staff, past and present, from ACEO Bongani to our cleaners, Marcel and Yasmina, we see you and appreciate you. As we collectively work together in the spirit of Ubuntu, I am because I belong, I am because I care, and Madibas, my favorite Batopele, service to the people. Together we continue healing our countries, our continent, and the world. Thank you, Ndino Tenda, Tatenda. I'm so proud to be an African and a Pan-African today. And respected people. We'll start with a very bookish person, the Reverend Damasani, and because he's so very bookish, these are books. I think you must count.